Welcome to Mastering Life's Adventures, an educational podcast about tapping into your true self, the soul, the substance of your life, to discover what life's ups and downs are really about, and how to have a greater sense of purpose, peace, joy, and fulfillment. I am Dr. Judith Holder, your host, coach, psychologist, fellow seeker who enjoys diving into the connections between spirituality, psychology, wellness, and your everyday life's adventures. All preparing and polishing you like the facets of a magnificent diamond to be your best self. If you're craving more from your life, you are in the right place. Come, let's journey together and transforming what you know into who you really are. Mastering Life's Adventures begins now.
Hi, I'm back to talk about another simple key in our soul growth series, and that is around praising others. What happens that it's hard for us, not everyone, but people get into this kind of ebb and flow of not wanting to praise others, not seeing the good in others, not seeing the kindness that another person is doing, or gestures of kindness that are taking place. What happens in our own psyche that we resist sometimes praising others for the good that you see that they're doing and the good impact that they may be having to other individuals? And what impact does that have on soul growth, evolution? So my question to you is, why don't we praise other people? Why not praise them? And I have some thoughts about that. I think we're living in a world in which we are walking maybe in a little bit blind and not seeing the goodness of things. Instead, we're seeing the negative and the negativity around us at work or in our relationships with other people, in our marriages and our interactions with significant people in our life and lives. There are things that may be happening for us that we need to be aware of and start to root out of ourselves. So this first component I'm going to be talking about, why not praising other people? And in that same fact, why don't we even praise ourselves at times? There seems to be a sparsity in giving praise and appreciation and seeing the good in a world that is kind of rolling by us very, very quickly, and in a world that is filled with a lot of conflict, even at the national or at the global level, or even at our own personal and societal level. And these things I want you to think about, and do you see them in yourself of why you don't praise? Because you may be a person who does praise others. And then think about it from the lens of what impact does it have on our soul? And this may be another part. I may do the second part as relates to the impact on our soul and not doing the praise and appreciation. But I want to first talk about and give you some things to think about of why not praising or giving praise to other people. And I was thinking about this in terms of what happens mentally, emotionally, and physically to us as possible reasons why we don't get praise. Where's this coming from? Praise is the ability to see the good and see the beauty and see the magnificence in another person or situation or things that are occurring within society that are uplifting to other individuals. And also its equality of being able to, when we praise other people and believing that within that person is also a soul, and that soul is connected to its source of divinity, then we're also praising God. You may not have thought of it that way, but it's something that I would like you to think about, and something I will have some more conversations around, either, as I said, later on, or as a part 2 of this pondering of why not praise others. The first thing I wanted to say in this mental, breaking it down into these categories, and you may see it differently, and I'll be interested if you do, I'm just going to talk about a couple of the mental and then the emotional and a little bit more about the physical reasons why we may not praise. The first mental one is sometimes we don't praise is because we feel we don't need to. That in some ways made me feel some degree of superiority. Well, anybody can do that. Or, that's not worth very much. Or, I'm not sure why this person is grinning from cheek to cheek because they didn't do very much. We get into this area of superiority, and that superiority gets us into this criticalness about thinking that we are better than others. But as I talked about in one of my episodes, we've got to be willing to be gracious, and we have to be willing to see the good in other individuals. And that superiority, and you're going to see a lot of this is coming from a different vantage point that is not a spiritual path. It is really on the path of the mundane and the materialism of this superiority, and it usually goes with superiority. We talk about them in psychology as defense mechanisms. It's also the inferiority complexes that take place. You don't want to get into the seesaw of feeling superior or feeling inferior, and that's why you can't see the good in other people and give them praise. But instead, you want to take a step back and say, what's up? What's going on here? I can see this person just did a great job. Why not just let them know they did a great job? And because there's something going on mentally in how we're thinking and perceiving that's hindering us, we have to look at that and see how we want to step over that. The other type of mental aspect that takes place is that the perception of being weak in some ways. And we don't want to perceive it as weak, especially in the workplace, for example, where there's a lot of need to be able to make sure you're doing it right. People are accepting what you're saying and what you're doing in meetings, that you are really on your game and doing your best. And so if we praise someone else, then sometimes people feel vulnerable that we ourselves are praising and we are feeling vulnerable in the particular environment that we're finding ourselves in. For example, as I mentioned, work. And so it's really tough for us to praise because it's a quality that we don't necessarily always value, and we perceive it more as a weakness. But is that true? Is praise really a weakness? Or is it an act of kindness? Or an act of humility? Or an act of being real and seeing things of what another person's doing or a situation that's occurring as good, as holy, as virtuous? So we have to look at, if we perceive the weakness is by praising others, which equals that we're going to be vulnerable. Well, what is the vulnerability that you're talking about? Because we sometimes in our own psyche can set up these barriers to believe that, it's weak, or I'm going to be vulnerable if I say you did a good job. But that's what the ego persona works from. You can't do that. It's the ego persona. Because you want to feel strong, but it's a false strong. The more that we give the praise and appreciation, that's the avenue of building our inner strength, because it ties into something greater than ourselves. As I said earlier, that view of goodness that you see through praise in other individuals, we also see that Christ, the Atman, the higher aspects of this person, and we're appreciating that. In our appreciation of this person and the actions and whatever they're doing, we're also appreciating God in them, just as there is God within us. The other aspect of maybe mentally why we have to have a mind shift in how we're thinking about praise, is sometimes we think that people will have a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of what we're saying. They may, for instance, avoid praising others due to a fear that their praising will be interpreted as being insincere or being manipulative. And if we're genuine and our heart is genuine in the praise that we're giving, then that's not true. regardless of what other people may perceive or people think or whatever. And so we have to check that and just say, am I looking at this in the right lens? And however a person wants to take it on the other end, as long as I'm being genuine in my praise, I'm going to do it anyway. So those are some of the things that may happen in our thinking about why we're not going to praise another person mentally. You may have different thoughts to that. I'd love to hear them. Now, there's some emotional aspects that also I want to share of why we don't praise other people, because this is a big issue when it comes to your alignment with Christ, your soul, with your higher sense of self, and with Buddha, with whoever, that pristine energy that allows you to be tied into something greater than yourself. One of the things, sometimes emotionally, why we don't praise others is due to insecurity. And we withhold the praise because we fear that acknowledgement of someone else's accomplishments or strengths that they may have, or they're really good with public speaking, or they're very good with their hands and working on projects and need to get done. They're very good with seeing the beauty in artwork. They have a lot of creativity that goes on. And those are the strengths. But because they're their strengths, we don't praise them for the accomplishments or their natural talents or even more learned talents that they've been able to garner, because we perceive it that it will diminish us in some ways and move us into believing that if they're good, then, what's the matter with me? It's as if we can't give the praise because our own value and our own views about ourselves will be diminished. Our achievements that we have had will be diminished because we're praising someone else. And that is coming from a point of insecurity. It's something to be looked at. Everyone has gifts. Everyone has talents. And so do you. And how do we just honor that and not get into, again, the ego's persona, what I call the ego persona, of always wanting to think that it needs to be number one in everything that is done. That's not true. We don't need to be number one. You want to be number one in everything? I think there's probably some things you say, no, I don't want to be number one in that. If you come to think about it, you don't need to be in everything. You need to be the best in who you need to be and what you do and how you show up in the world. And this ties into another aspect of the emotional elements of why we don't praise is jealousy. Feelings of envy that can lead to us withholding any praise of people or events or actions or circumstances that we find ourselves in that are positive. And it is as if there's this trigger that happens in us when we see what's going on with other people and the good that's happening in their world. It triggers in us this jealousy, this negative emotion within us. And you know what? We need to look at that. We need to say, okay, where's this jealousy coming from, or this envy coming from? And their talents are different from my talents. And why can't that be okay? We have to be aware of these aspects that are taking us subtly off the path of our spiritual growth and advancement. Be it of the mental that I've just finished talking about in terms of the superiority, inferiority views about a situation and the perceptions of weakness and the misinterpretations that may happen. And now we're talking about some of the emotional that may happen for us, of why it's hard for us to praise other people because of our own insecurity or because of jealousy. And the other piece that I want to talk about is stubbornness. That we can see all these great things happening to people, but what happens for us to be stubborn? It's like, nope, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to look and, say to myself, wow, that was pretty good. but in saying it to another person because of what we think of that person, or because of thinking that this will go to their head, quote unquote, for the person. So we're stubborn. Even though you may have the inner prompting of your soul, this tells you, let that person know they did a great job. How they talked about this or acted in this scene, if with on a stage, or if it's with a work project. If your inner self is saying, praise that person, give them the glory. Because by praising, giving them the glory, you're giving God the glory in them and in yourself. It's like a figure-8 flow that exchanges between you and them. And in that nexus and that figure-8 flow is the power of goodness that happens. That we feel good, they feel good, and this exchange of positive energy, of Christic energy, of the virtues that you may be trying to garner or moving you along more on that spiritual path. Be aware of these triggers that happen for us. Be these emotional triggers of insecurity and jealousy and stubbornness that are getting in our way to praise. When we can see it, be aware of it, identify it, then we can change it. But if it's happening at the subconscious level, the lower levels within ourselves, it's kind of perks his head once in a while. And when it perks his head, that's when we say, aha, I see you. I see this energy. Now, do I want to keep on with this energy? Is it to the glory of God that this energy is coming up this way in me? Usually not, if it's coming in these forms that I've been just talking about that hinder us to praise other individuals. So the emotional ones, the 3 that I talked about, is related to that insecurity. Would you put that in insecurity, or would you put that in the mental, or you would put it in another category? Let me know. Then there is the jealousy, and then there's the stubbornness that sometimes we can get into. And stubbornness, we don't realize, is a form of rebellion. But we don't want to rebel. We rebelled against God and his creatures and the people that are coming in our worlds, and that he's showing us something about ourselves. All these experiences, especially the ones around why we can't praise other people, is helping us to fine-tune ourselves, helping us to look at ourselves from a different lens and be able to make some corrections with that. Now, the physical reasons that we may not praise, first I want to talk about is competitiveness, that we can be competitive, especially in environments where competitiveness is like adrenaline. In the work environment, in highly competitive, risk-taking types of sports, that we sometimes get into this desire, we want to refrain from praising others as a strategy, especially in these high, intense types of sports, that you start to you strategize, because if they know they're doing good, then it may give them an advantage or an edge in some way. And so in order to not show and give them that edge, or feel you're inadequate or not going to do it as well as they did, you say nothing. You say nothing. You actually try to strategize a way to look bigger, feel more powerful. Let them know who's in control in the situation. The ego persona is always in that mode of competitiveness, comparison. Doesn't mean that you can't work your best and do your best and think strategically about how you want to win. That's fine, but not from the vantage point of the ego persona. It is from the vantage point of the soul, and the soul always wanting to do its best, always wanting to achieve its highest, always wanting to show God the glory in whatever they do. So it has to be shifted in some ways. Now, the next aspect on the physical, and again, you may put these in different categories than the ones that I'm putting them in. The next is fear of recognition. There might be instances where you may hesitate to praise others because there's this fear of doing so could draw attention to them. potentially lead to them getting the limelight, and you feel you should be in the limelight. And so we don't praise others because we want the recognition. And we fear if they're getting the recognition, then they are going to look better and do better. People will put the attention to them. Why can't we have the attention go around to all of us? The more that we give praise to other individuals, it's like a boomerang. That praise starts to come back to us. As long as it's genuine, in terms of being authentic, being real, that we're doing this from that vantage point, and not to score a win, but instead to be in alignment with what God naturally does in the praising of his sons and daughters. He naturally wants us to praise others, and he wants us to be that point of divinity, of light, of graciousness, of kindness, of gratitude, and giving to others to help them, because we never know when a person's down and out and feeling bad about something or struggling over something. They may be going through a divorce, or they may have lost a loved one, or they may have lost a child, which is very painful as a parent to have to go through. Or they may have come down with something, a terminal illness. So the praise that we give can be uplifting to that person in terms of their soul, and helping to add to that soul substance of who they really are. Because sometimes when we're in that dark cloud, we can't see our gifts. We can't see the impact that we've had on other individuals. We're unable, as if when we're in that cloud, all we see is fuzziness. Fuzziness in thinking, fuzziness in feeling, because we may be feeling anxious. And so when other people can see some goodness in us, or they can see some fine qualities that we may have, wow, why not do it naturally? Especially if you're being prompted by your inner self to do it. Now, the other aspect of why we don't necessarily praise people is also related to cultural norms. There's some cultures that's outside the norm, that's outside the purview, their way of being. That might be true, but you have to look culturally too. When is it still genuine and appropriate to give praise? And how do I do it in a way that honors that person? There's some people go over the top with their praise. And people say, that's just too much, that's over the top. They went on and on and on and on. And I'm not sure if I can even trust what they're saying. That might be, there's some individuals that go over the top. But for the majority of people, when they're giving a praise, just say thank you. Thank you. And then leave it at that. But that just as much as another person gives praise, that's why we can always give them acknowledgement and thank them in a kind and considerate way. And then you move about your direction you need to move in, and they in the direction that they need to move in. So yes, I realize there are cultural norms, cultural expectations of what the do's and the don'ts. But when your soul is prompting you to praise someone, praise them. That was a great statement you made there. Does that take very much? Is that outside the cultural norms to say that? Most likely not, but you can let me know. Then the last thing I want to talk about under this physical aspect of why not praise others is this quality of making assumptions of the person being self-sufficient. They don't need it. They're already self-sufficient. They're self-reliant. They are able to do things. And they seem like they do it pretty well, and they're pretty confident in what they're doing. So they don't need me to praise them, sometimes we say. But it may not be true at all. The assumption that we're going from can lead to a lack of recognition from others and the efforts and the accomplishments that they have achieved. If we see it, tag it, name it, express it. Tag it, name it, express it. It doesn't have to be in any grandiose way. If you see it, you express it. Wow, you did that really nicely. Maybe something like that, simple as that. Well, what we're trying to do when we're doing the praise is get past the ego persona who always wants to be in the limelight, who always wants to be right, who always wants recognition of the accomplishments or the achievements that I have in there. And we're saying is of the mundane and the materialistic way of living. It is not of the divine and the spiritual way of living. Now, I just finished talking about, it ends up being maybe 9 or 10 ways in which why we don't praise. And I'm just going to bring in one other quality really quickly, and then I'm going to, in part 2, talk about more about the importance of praise as a lighthouse and how it feels and bees a beacon of light and what that means. So this last point that I want to make is sometimes we don't praise because we're either feeling too busy, or we're feeling too overwhelmed. So we ended up not praising things that we're seeing around us, even though we see it. But because we're so absorbed in our busyness and feeling overwhelmed, and we may be working in a high type of pressure environment with work and trying to deadlines that need to be done, or becomes a type of occupation that you do have, and it kind of is like one after the other, you just trying to manage your day-to-day affairs and activities that you're trying to prioritize and make sure you're getting the tasks done and taking on the responsibilities that are being requested of you, that it leaves little room for us to acknowledge others and what we see going on. Even though we see it, we don't tag it, we don't name it, we don't express it. That lack of not praising is because of time constraints or feeling overwhelmed because of the workload we have to look at. And we have to look at what's happening that I'm so self-absorbed that I'm not willing to see what others are doing around me and acknowledge it. Because that acknowledgement of the good that you see around you, I swing back around too, is also acknowledging the good that exists within you and your soul progress and evolution. And it ties in to being more Christ-like and more in the flame and vibration of love, of givingness, of service, because praising is a form of service. And that service is what we're all trying to do, walking a spiritual path and allowing our soul to evolve, is that service is in the light of Christ, in the light of what Jesus would do in the situations that we find ourselves in. Something to think about. Bye for now.
Thank you for joining me for this episode on Mastering Life's Adventures, being your best self through soul evolution. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, I would be delighted if you would share this episode with others, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe to my Mastering Life's Adventures podcast. Look forward to your joining the next episode. Please leave any comments or suggestions you might have below. Bye for now.